For the past few days, we've explored how cells move materials in and out across the cell membrane. But what happens to materials once they're inside a cell? Well, in order to understand what happens to those materials, we need to take a look at the structures inside a cell, the organelles. So an organelle is simply a smaller structure inside a cell that carries out a particular job. And you can see in this particular cell, there's lots of organelles. Right now we're looking at a eukaryotic cell, and we're going to be focusing on eukaryotic cells in this video. Most organelles have their own membranes. So this organelle has its own membrane, and this organelle has its own membrane. Meanwhile, it's inside a cell that has its own membrane. And organelles are really important because they make things more efficient for the cell. They're able to provide more workspace for chemical reactions, and they're able to isolate chemical reactions. So this organelle might be doing one chemical reaction, and it's really good at it. Meanwhile, this organelle is doing a different chemical reaction. So let's take a look at these organelles in two main types of eukaryotic cells. Plant cells are one type of eukaryotic cell. Here you can see that they have a nucleus, which contains a smaller structure called a nucleolus. There's a mitochondria. There are chloroplasts, the large green structures, small structures called ribosomes, cytoplasm, a membrane, as well as a wall, and a big vacuole right in the middle, as well as structures called Golgi complex and endoplasmic reticulum. An animal cell has many of these same structures: the membrane, the endoplasmic reticulum, a nucleus, ribosome, lysosome, that's new, mitochondria, and the Golgi body. You're probably noticing, though, that there are a few things missing from the animal cell. We'll come back to those in a couple minutes. So let's take a look at each of these organelles one at a time and see what they each do. So we'll start with the cytoplasm, which really isn't an organelle. It's just the fluid that fills the cell. And you might see this sometimes called the cytosol. The cytoplasm contains lots of dissolved solutes, and it has on average a molarity of 0.3. Floating around in the cytoplasm, usually in the middle, is the nucleus. And the nucleus is super important because that's where the DNA is found. And the DNA stays in the nucleus at all times. The nucleus is surrounded by not one but two membranes, forming what's called a nuclear envelope. And there are little holes or pores in the nuclear envelope, so certain materials can get in and out. Now, the ribosome is perhaps the smallest organelle in the cell, and it doesn't have its own membrane. Ribosomes are little protein factories. They make all the protein for the cell. Some of them are free, and they're just floating around the cytoplasm. Some of them, however, are attached to the endoplasmic reticulum, making it look rough. So we call this the rough endoplasmic reticulum. So let's take a closer look at that. Here is the endoplasmic reticulum. We are zooming in right now on the middle of the cell. You can see that the endoplasmic reticulum is actually connected to the nucleus. So it's just a series of compartments that kind of radiate out from the center. And as we mentioned, the rough ER has ribosomes attached to it, right here. There's also smooth ER that does not have ribosomes attached to it. The smooth ER makes lipids instead. So the rough ER's ribosomes make proteins, and the smooth makes lipids. A related organelle is the Golgi apparatus. Sometimes you'll hear this called the Golgi body or the Golgi complex. It's all the same thing if it has Golgi in it. The Golgi apparatus looks like a stack of pancakes to me. And it's usually near the endoplasmic reticulum, but it is a separate structure. And what the Golgi apparatus does is it packages and processes proteins. It kind of puts the finishing touch on them. So here we've got a ribosome just made a protein. And that protein gets shipped off to the Golgi apparatus, which, tweaks it a little bit, might add a few molecules. And then when it's done, that protein might be ready to leave the cell via exocytosis and go do something somewhere else. Now, all of these processes take energy, and that's where the mitochondrion comes in. The mitochondrion is found in all eukaryotic cells, and it converts food energy into usable energy in a process known as cellular respiration. So food goes in and we get ATP, usable energy, out. The lysosome is a structure we'll find in animal cells, and you can think of the lysosome as the custodian of the cell. Its job is to break down wastes and old cell parts so that they can be recycled. And in order to do that, it contains digestive chemicals, and we'll find out more about those chemicals in our next unit. The chloroplast. Here is a structure that's found only in plant cells and some protist cells. The chloroplast is where photosynthesis occurs. And during photosynthesis, solar energy from the sun gets transformed into chemical energy, glucose. And this is possible because the chloroplast contains a green pigment called chlorophyll, and it's that chlorophyll that captures the sunlight that it uses as energy. Another structure found only in plant cells is the cell wall. The cell wall is exactly what it sounds like. It provides structure and support, both to plant and fungus cells. In plants, the cell wall is made up of a carbohydrate called cellulose, whereas in fungus cells, the cell wall is made of chitin. The central vacuole is also something found only in plant cells. The central vacuole is very large and it's filled with all sorts of things like food, water, and waste. And it's important for a plant cell to have the vacuole filled with water because that helps provide support. Animal cells do have vacuoles, but their vacuoles are very small and just used for storage, not support like a plant cell's central vacuole. And that concludes our tour of the organelles you'll find in eukaryotic cells.